Sarah Martinez stepped off the bus at the military training facility, with nothing but a worn duffel bag and determination burning in her chest. The other recruits were already forming groups, laughing loudly and sizing each other up. She kept her head down and walked toward the registration building, hoping to blend into the background. The morning sun was harsh against the concrete buildings, and the sound of drill sergeants shouting orders echoed across the compound. Sarah had dreamed of this moment for years, but now that she was here, doubt crept into her mind. She was smaller than most of the other recruits, quieter too, while they boasted about their athletic achievements and military family backgrounds. Sarah simply listened. During the first formation, Sergeant Williams lined up all the new recruits. Sarah found herself standing next to Mike Torres, a tall guy from Texas who kept making jokes under his breath. On her other side was Jessica Chen, who had already made it clear she was here because her father was a decorated colonel. They barely acknowledged Sarah's presence. The barracks assignment came next. Sarah was placed in Bay 7 with 15 other female recruits. As she quietly unpacked her few belongings, the others were already establishing their social hierarchy. Jessica emerged as the natural leader, surrounded by followers who hung on her every word. Sarah focused on organizing her small space, trying to stay invisible. Training began the next morning at 0500 hours. Physical fitness was the first test, and Sarah struggled to keep up during the initial runs. While others sprinted ahead, she maintained a steady pace, finishing in the back third of the group. The drill sergeants said nothing, but she could feel the judgment from her fellow recruits. During combat training, things got worse. Sarah had never thrown a punch in her life, while many others came from backgrounds where fighting was second nature. When paired up for sparring practice, she was easily overpowered. Mike Torres laughed when he knocked her down for the third time. "Maybe you should have joined the Peace Corps instead," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The comments started small, whispered jokes about her quiet nature, eye rolls when she asked questions during briefings, and deliberate exclusion from group conversations. Sarah told herself it was normal hazing, something all recruits went through. She buried herself in the technical manuals, studying late into the night, while others socialized. Weapons training revealed Sarah's first strength. While others struggled with the complexity of dismantling and reassembling firearms, Sarah's careful attention to detail paid off. She could strip and rebuild an M4 rifle faster than anyone in her unit. But instead of earning respect, it only made some recruits more resentful. "Great. The bookworm can handle guns," Jessica muttered during one session. "Too bad wars aren't fought in libraries." The breaking point came during the third week. The recruits were assigned to work in teams for a field exercise. Sarah was paired with Jessica's group, but it was clear she wasn't wanted. They gave her the least important tasks and ignored her suggestions during planning sessions. When their mission failed because they missed a crucial detail that Sarah had tried to point out, somehow, it became her fault. That night in the barracks, the taunting reached a new level. Sarah lay in her bunk, pretending to sleep, while the others talked about her just loud enough for her to hear. "She's never going to make it," Jessica said. "Some people just aren't cut out for military life. They should kick her out before she gets someone killed." Mike added his own commentary. "My dad always said the military isn't a place for weaklings. She'd probably cry if she had to face real combat." Number 1. Sarah's hands clenched into fists under her thin blanket. Every instinct told her to fight back, to defend herself. But she had learned long ago that sometimes the best strategy was patience. Her father had taught her that before he died in Afghanistan when she was 12. He had been quiet too, but he was also the most decorated soldier in his unit. The next morning brought news that would change everything, though none of them knew it yet. Sergeant Williams announced that a group of senior officers would be visiting to observe their training. Among them would be some of the youngest commanders in military history, people who had risen through the ranks with unprecedented speed. Sarah felt a flutter of excitement. She had read about these rising stars in military journals, young officers who were revolutionizing combat strategy and leadership techniques. She wondered what they would think of the current crop of recruits. The harassment continued throughout the week leading up to the visit. Sarah's equipment was mysteriously moved or damaged, her study materials disappeared, and she was excluded from group meals. The drill sergeants either didn't notice or chose to ignore the social dynamics, focusing instead on preparing for the important visit. During one particularly difficult day, Sarah found herself alone in the equipment shed, checking inventory as punishment for supposedly losing a piece of gear that had actually been hidden by other recruits. As she worked methodically through the supplies, she thought about her father's letters from deployment. He had written about the importance of proving yourself through actions, not words, and about how true leadership often came from unexpected places. The sound of approaching footsteps made her look up. Jessica and 3 other recruits entered the shed, blocking the exit. The look in their eyes made Sarah's stomach tighten with apprehension. "We need to talk," Jessica said, her voice carrying a threatening edge that Sarah had never heard before. "Some of us think it's time you faced reality about your future in the military." Sarah straightened up, her father's voice echoing in her memory. He had always told her that courage wasn't about being fearless, but about doing what was right even when you were afraid. As she faced the group of hostile recruits, she realized that her real test was just beginning. The confrontation was interrupted by the sound of vehicles arriving outside. The visiting officers had come a day early, and through the small window, Sarah could see official cars pulling up to the main building. The recruits hurried out, leaving Sarah alone with her racing thoughts and the growing certainty that everything was about to change. That evening, as the recruits prepared for the official presentation the next day, Sarah made a decision that would surprise everyone, including herself. She had spent weeks being the quiet target, absorbing every insult and slight. But she had also been learning, watching, and preparing for something none of them could imagine. The stage was set for a revelation that would turn the entire dynamic upside down. Though the recruits who had tormented her remained blissfully unaware of what was coming, Sarah went to sleep that night with a small smile on her face, knowing that tomorrow would bring justice in a way that no one expected. The morning of the inspection arrived with unusual tension in the air. Sarah woke before the alarm, as she had every day since arriving at the facility, while her bunkmates rushed around in panic, trying to perfect their uniforms and equipment. She moved with calm precision. Her boots were already polished to a mirror shine, her uniform pressed and ready. The visiting delegation was larger than expected. Military vehicles lined the parade ground, and officers in dress uniforms walked between buildings with clipboards and serious expressions. Sarah watched through the barracks window as a particular figure emerged from the lead vehicle. Even from a distance, she recognized the confident stride and perfect posture. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, the youngest female battalion commander in the Army's recent history, stepped onto the parade ground. Sarah's heart raced, but not from nervousness. At 28, Hayes had already led successful operations in 3 different theaters and was known for her innovative tactical thinking. Few people knew the personal connection that was about to be revealed. During morning formation, the recruits stood at attention while the visiting officers walked down the line. Sarah kept her eyes forward, but she could sense the inspection team moving closer. When they paused in front of her section, she heard a familiar voice that made her pulse quicken. "These recruits show promise," Colonel Hayes said to Sergeant Williams. "I'm particularly interested in seeing how they perform under pressure. Do any stand out in terms of leadership potential or unique skills?" Sergeant Williams gestured towards several recruits, including Jessica and Mike. "These individuals have shown natural leadership abilities and strong physical performance," he said. Sarah wasn't mentioned, which was exactly what she expected. The real test came during the tactical exercise scheduled for that afternoon. The recruits were divided into teams and given a complex scenario involving hostage rescue and enemy territory navigation. Sarah found herself assigned to Team C, once again with Jessica as the designated leader. The visiting officers would observe from a control room, monitoring radio communications and tracking progress. Jessica immediately took charge, delegating tasks based on her assumptions about each person's abilities. Sarah was assigned to communications, which Jessica considered the least important role. "Just relay our messages and try not to mess up the radio," Jessica said dismissively. What Jessica didn't know was that Sarah had spent countless hours studying military communication protocols and had actually designed several improvements to standard procedures during her pre-enlistment preparation. As the exercise began, Sarah quietly set up multiple backup communication channels and established encrypted links that would prove crucial later. The scenario quickly became complicated. Team A encountered unexpected resistance and called for backup. Team B lost their radio operator to simulated enemy fire. Jessica's team was supposed to provide support, but her aggressive strategy led them into an obvious trap. Within minutes, half the team was marked as casualties, including Jessica herself. "This is a disaster," Mike Torres muttered over the radio. "We need to abort and regroup." Sarah saw the situation differently. From her position with the communication equipment, she had a clear picture of all team movements and enemy positions. She also noticed something the observers had missed: a critical flaw in the exercise setup that created an opportunity for a brilliant, tactical solution. Speaking quietly into her headset, Sarah contacted the control room. "Command. This is Team C Communications. I have a tactical observation that could change the mission parameters." Colonel Hayes' voice came back immediately. "Go ahead, Team C Communications." Sarah outlined a strategy that would use the terrain features and current team positions to execute a flanking maneuver that wasn't in any standard playbook. It required precise timing and unconventional thinking, but it could save the mission and minimize casualties. There was silence from the control room before Colonel Hayes responded. "Team C Communications, take operational command and execute your plan." The other recruits stared at Sarah in shock as she calmly began issuing orders. Her quiet voice carried absolute authority as she coordinated movements between all three teams. She repositioned units, established new communication protocols, and guided them through a complex series of maneuvers that completely surprised the simulated enemy forces. Jessica, watching from the sidelines as a casualty, couldn't believe what she was seeing. The girl they had mocked and dismissed was orchestrating a textbook perfect military operation with the confidence of a seasoned officer. Sarah's plan worked flawlessly. Within 30 minutes, all hostages were rescued, enemy positions were neutralized, and friendly casualties were minimized. The control room was silent as the exercise concluded with a success rate that exceeded all expectations. That evening, the visiting officers held a debriefing session with all recruits. Colonel Hayes stood at the front of the room, her expression unreadable as she reviewed the day's performance. The recruits who had performed well beamed with pride, while others looked nervous about their failures. Today's exercise revealed several important things about leadership and adaptability. Colonel Hayes began. "Some of you showed courage under fire. Others demonstrated technical skills. But one individual displayed something rarer: the ability to see opportunities where others see only obstacles." Sarah sat quietly in the back row, wondering if she would be called out for taking initiative beyond her assigned role. Military hierarchy was strict, and she had essentially overridden the established command structure. Colonel Hayes continued. "The recruit who assumed operational command during the crisis showed not only tactical brilliance, but also the courage to take responsibility when others were ready to accept failure. This is exactly the kind of thinking our military needs in the modern era." The room was completely silent. Jessica and Mike exchanged confused glances, still not fully understanding what had happened, or how Sarah had suddenly become the center of positive attention. "However," Colonel Hayes added, "I also observed some troubling behavior during my visit. Reports indicate that certain recruits have created a hostile environment for others, engaging in harassment and exclusion that has no place in military service." Now the atmosphere grew tense for different reasons. Sarah felt eyes turning toward her, and she knew that some of her tormentors were beginning to realize they might be in trouble. Colonel Hayes pulled out a folder and began reading names. The following individuals will report to my office immediately after this session for individual counseling on professional conduct and military values. Jessica's name was the first called, followed by Mike and 3 others. The color drained from their faces as they realized their behavior had been noticed and documented by someone far more important than they had imagined. As the meeting concluded, Sarah gathered her materials and prepared to leave. She had no idea that the biggest revelation was still coming, or that her quiet months of endurance were about to pay off in ways none of her fellow recruits could have predicted. Colonel Hayes approached her as the room emptied. "Recruit Martinez, please remain behind. I'd like to discuss your performance today, and some other matters." Sarah stood at attention, her heart pounding as she prepared for what she assumed would be either praise for her tactical thinking or criticism for overstepping her authority. She had no way of knowing that the conversation about to unfold would change everything about how her fellow recruits saw her. And themselves. Colonel Hayes waited until the room was completely empty before speaking. Sarah stood at perfect attention, her mind racing through possible outcomes of this private conversation. The colonel studied her for a long moment, and Sarah caught something familiar in her expression, something that made her stomach flutter with anticipation. "At ease, Sarah," Colonel Hayes said, using her first name instead of her rank. "I think we can drop the formalities for a moment." Sarah relaxed slightly but remained alert. There was something in the colonel's tone that suggested this conversation would be unlike any she had experienced during training. "Do you know why I'm really here?" Colonel Hayes asked, moving to look out the window at the parade ground where other recruits were beginning their evening routines. "To observe recruit training and evaluate potential, ma'am," Sarah responded automatically. Colonel Hayes smiled. And suddenly Sarah saw it. The resemblance was unmistakable now that she was looking for it. The same dark eyes, the same determined jawline, the same way of tilting her head when thinking deeply. "I'm here because I've been following your progress since the day you enlisted," Colonel Hayes said quietly. "I'm here because your father was my mentor, and because he made me promise to watch out for you if anything ever happened to him." Sarah's world shifted completely. Her father had mentioned Patricia Hayes in his letters, a young lieutenant he had taken under his wing during his final deployment. But he had never told Sarah that this rising star would one day become her guardian angel in the military. "He told me about you constantly," Colonel Hayes continued. "How smart you were, how you studied his tactical manuals even as a child, how you had inherited his gift for seeing patterns that others missed. He was so proud when you decided to enlist, but he was also worried about how you would handle the social challenges." Tears threatened to form in Sarah's eyes, but she maintained her composure. Her father had been planning for her success even while fighting his final battles overseas. Colonel Hayes turned back to face her. "I've been getting reports about your training progress, both official and unofficial. Your instructors note your exceptional analytical skills and attention to detail. But I've also heard about the harassment you've been enduring from other recruits." Sarah's jaw tightened. She had never complained or reported the mistreatment, handling it the way her father had taught her to handle all challenges, with quiet determination and focus on the end goal. "Today's exercise was a test, but not the kind your fellow recruits thought it was," Colonel Hayes explained. "I designed that scenario specifically to see how you would respond when given real responsibility. Your father always said that true leaders emerge in moments of crisis, when following orders isn't enough and someone has to make the hard decisions." The pieces were falling into place for Sarah. The complex scenario, the communication equipment placement, the opportunity for tactical innovation. It had all been carefully orchestrated to give her a chance to show her capabilities. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now you learn about the accelerated leadership program that your father and I discussed before his death," Colonel Hayes said. "He made me promise to offer you opportunities to advance based on merit, not politics or popularity. Your performance today qualified you for immediate consideration." Colonel Hayes pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a series of documents. "These are your new orders. Effective immediately, you're being transferred to the Advanced Tactical Training Program. It's a fast-track program for individuals who show exceptional leadership potential. You'll complete your basic training with honors and move directly into officer candidate school. Sarah stared at the orders, hardly believing what she was seeing. Everything she had dreamed about, everything her father had hoped for her, was suddenly within reach. But first, Colonel Hayes said, her expression becoming serious again, we need to address the situation with your former bunkmates. The door opened and Sergeant Williams entered, followed by Jessica, Mike, and the other recruits who had made Sarah's life miserable. They looked confused and nervous, clearly not understanding why they had been summoned back to the briefing room. Colonel Hayes stood at the front of the room with military bearing that commanded instant respect. Sarah remained at her side, and for the first time since arriving at the facility, she felt truly confident. I want to address some misconceptions that seem to have developed during this training cycle, Colonel Hayes began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding hundreds of soldiers. Some of you have made assumptions about your fellow recruits based on incomplete information. Jessica shifted uncomfortably, beginning to sense that this conversation would not go as she expected. Recruit Martinez, whom some of you thought was unsuitable for military service, has just been selected for the Advanced Tactical Training Program based on her exceptional performance during today's exercise, Colonel Hayes announced. The shock on their faces was visible and immediate. Mike's mouth actually fell open as he tried to process this information. Colonel Hayes continued. Furthermore, Recruit Martinez is the daughter of Master Sergeant Carlos Martinez, Medal of Honor recipient, and one of the finest soldiers I ever had the privilege of serving alongside. Her father died in service to our country, and she has honored his memory through her dedication and performance. Jessica looked like she might be sick. All the cruel comments about Sarah's family background, all the assumptions about her lack of military connection, were crashing down around her. I've been observing this unit for weeks, not just today, Colonel Hayes said, her tone becoming stern. I've documented instances of harassment, exclusion, and behavior that violates everything our military stands for. Some of you forgot that we succeed as a team, or we fail as a team. She pulled out a folder containing detailed reports. The following individuals will face formal disciplinary action for conduct unbecoming future soldiers: Chen, Torres, Williams, and Bradford. You will complete additional training on military values and professional conduct before being considered for advancement. The named recruits looked devastated. Their dreams of military careers were suddenly in jeopardy because of their treatment of someone they had considered weak. However, Colonel Hayes added, I believe in second chances for those willing to learn from their mistakes. You will have the opportunity to redeem yourselves through your actions going forward. She turned to Sarah, her expression softening slightly. Recruit Martinez, do you have anything you'd like to say to your former bunkmates? Sarah looked at the group of recruits who had tormented her for weeks. She could have been angry, could have used this moment for revenge. Instead, she thought about what her father would have wanted her to say. I hope we can all learn from this experience, Sarah said quietly. The military teaches us that our strength comes from supporting each other, not tearing each other down. I hope we can move forward as better soldiers and better people. The room was completely silent. Even Jessica, who had been so confident and dismissive weeks earlier, seemed humbled by Sarah's grace under pressure. Colonel Hayes nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of leadership our military needs. Recruit Martinez, pack your gear. You ship out to advanced training tomorrow morning. As the meeting concluded and the recruits filed out, Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. She had proven herself, but she was also leaving behind people who might have become friends under different circumstances. That evening, as Sarah packed her belongings for the transfer, several of her former bunkmates approached her. Jessica was among them, her usual confidence replaced by genuine remorse. Sarah, I owe you an apology, Jessica said, struggling with words that didn't come easily. We were wrong about you, and we treated you terribly. You showed more class in 5 minutes than we showed in 5 weeks. Mike nodded in agreement. Your dad would be proud of you. I hope someday we can earn your respect, the way you earned ours." Sarah accepted their apologies graciously, knowing that real leadership meant helping others grow from their mistakes rather than holding grudges. The next morning, as her transport arrived to take her to the advanced training program, Sarah took one last look at the facility where she had endured so much and discovered so much about herself. The quiet recruit who had stepped off the bus weeks earlier was gone, replaced by a confident future leader who understood that true strength often comes disguised as gentleness. Colonel Hayes appeared at her side as she loaded her gear into the vehicle. "Your father would be incredibly proud," she said quietly. "He always said you had the heart of a warrior and the wisdom of a peacemaker. That's exactly what our military needs in its future commanders." Sarah smiled, feeling her father's presence in the morning sun, and knowing that her real journey was just beginning. The recruits who had once taunted her watched in respectful silence as their future commander drove away, finally understanding that they had been in the presence of greatness all along.